Hey, everybody, welcome back to another Salt City Hoops podcast and video. We have a very festive Mark Russell Pereira over there. I'm Dan Clayton. We're here to talk about the Utah Jazz. We have this weird little natural break. The NBA Cup in-season tournament, sponsored by somebody extravaganza, has created this weird little pocket where there's just one Jazz game in a stretch of 9 calendar days. It also happens to fall right around the quarter mark when things start to feel a little bit more statistically significant. So we thought that we would just get together and talk about, in broad terms, kind of what is disappointing, what is exciting, what's surprising in different directions. Mark is a little bit close to this because he's been thinking through some first quarter grades, and I haven't, but obviously have thoughts about, what we've been seeing. So we're just going to dive in and kind of free form some thoughts on what's happening to the Jazz after 23, 24 games. And to do so, let's welcome in Mark Russell Pereira. How you doing, Mark?
I'm excellent. We're recording this in the middle of the day for once, instead of at night, so I have a little bit of pep. I have a little bit of coffee, and yeah, we're in a festive spirit. Happy holidays. Hopefully, people have some breaks coming up. And I mentioned this on the last podcast. You were mentioning like, hey, we're trying to get a vibe and a feel for the Jazz. I would hope that like our audience is a mix of people who are sickos like us who watch every game, but hopefully we also have a lot of fans, and this is who I expect most fans to say, look, this team isn't winning. BYU basketball is terrific or something. Like, I'm going to pay more attention to them and the excitement around something else. I'm not going to watch every Utah Jazz game because they're probably losing and such. But I still love this team. I want to figure out where they're going. And I'm hoping that by listening to this podcast, you can say, hey, I'm going to get an educated check-in on the things I care about, right? Even if you haven't seen every game. And that's what the value that I want to provide folks, because I am a sicko who watches every game. Recording this on December 14th, and I did not see the Suns game last night because I was at Zoo Lights with my family, and I have to watch the recording of that. But there's so many players that I want to catch up with you on, Dan, because you and I haven't had a in-depth conversation with these things. I've talked about on many conversations about the disappointments I have or the things that I am encouraged about, and some of the things that I was despondent about in our last podcast have actually seen some upticks lately. So I might write some more things about letter grades, relative letter grades for people to digest on, their subway commutes or what have you. Please don't read your phone on the road. But I think in broad terms, I want our audience who is listening to this or watching this to say, how should I feel about these guys? Like, what should I look forward to next year? I'm not going to watch a single game, but I would like to know how to feel about this. Hopefully you do watch every game, and hopefully you're listening on the radio, perhaps, in Spanish language to hear your dulcet tones. But it's something that I'm hoping people can get value out of this over the next hour or so, to understand what to be excited about, what not to be excited about. Maybe we'll give them a reason to tune in for the next one.
Well, it is cool to your first point, Mark. It is cool to see what you look like in the daytime. Mark and I usually record these in the middle of the night when one or both of us is half asleep. So, we'll see. Maybe the product will be better because we're both awake. It's light, there's sun outside.
Not dissimilar to these. When I don't look at the Jazz schedule too far much in advance. Sometimes I look at the early season slate, but I was surprised. Every week I kind of check in. All right, what games are on? What times do we have any Eastern time games that I have to record or whatever? And the fact that we've had multiple middle of the day weekend games, I don't really recall this being a thing recently, including some home games. So that has been something that I've had to adjust as well. The Jazz have not responded with more pep in some of those middle of the day games from our experience, but we'll see how we do today.
I was thrown off. Right now, they're experimenting with this thing where weekend games are usually a half hour later, and that threw me off yesterday because I wound up thinking I was cutting it close getting to the arena, and then it turns out I was just sitting there for a long time. So just some weirdness to the schedule. I unfortunately do have to look ahead because my life kind of revolves around when the Jazz play these days. They do have just a killer stretch coming up. Their next 5 are on the road. They come home for Philly and Denver, which could be 2 really tough games or not, depending on whatever's happening with Joel Embiid's facial fracture, sinus fracture, and then they go back out on the road for 3 more in the East. So, like they're going to get to my birthday weekend, which is the first weekend in January, having just faced a brutal stretch. They'll be 8 games ahead on road games versus home by that point in the season, which means, that the second half of the season, there will be they'll spend a lot more time in this valley. But yeah, it is, we do have a kind of a murderer's row coming up. But with that said,
to that point, there's a lot of folks who are like, oh, I can't wait for the Jazz to lose every game, whatever. This having a backloaded home schedule, we talked about this before the season, that is good because it's usually in the back half of the season if you're pro lose every game, whatever. Because those are the games that is more palatable or culturally acceptable to rest your best players. And so if you have those easier home matchups later in the season, perhaps you're not exactly putting out your best lineups. Although, as Utah has shown us, led by Will Hardy, he can coach a bag of beans to a surprising victory. So maybe those home games might pose a problem. But we'll see. Right now, yeah, it's looking like a tough sledding out there. So, Dan, where should we begin today?
Well, I think we were talking about kind of going by groupings and who's surprised us positively, who's disappointed us a little bit. And just because, you're wearing your awesome holiday hat, you've got all this Yuletide cheer, I'm going to say let's start on the optimistic side of the spectrum. I, on the other hand, look just like a classic schlub middle-aged dad in the suburbs with my slightly paint-stained hoodie and my $8 Coles t-shirt. But you have inspired me.
You have really encouraged people to check out the video now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Subscribe on YouTube, everyone. Anyway, so let's start with, who I think has surprised us and who has exceeded expectations. And I think for most Jazz fans, there are probably 1 or 2 names that are highest on that list. For me, Walker Kessler is a little bit more nuanced, and we'll get to Walker. But I think for me, on the list of guys who have just kind of changed the way that I think we have to talk about them and think about them and articulate their value, like who is John Collins suddenly? Like this 50, 40, 90 guy who just assaults the rim 2 to 3 times a game and, still has all of the defensive flaws that we've talked about, but he's covering them up better, which has allowed the Jazz to go back to the 3 big man configuration with I wouldn't say success, but at least, it's not costed. They're basically playing even with opponents with Markkanen, Kessler, and Collins. I mean, what are your macro thoughts on just what we've seen out of John and what maybe it means for his value to the Jazz and or his value to 29 other teams?
So this feels like a weird thing to say, I think, about a professional athlete, especially a veteran professional athlete. And I always kind of mention on every podcast that I am also a middle-aged dad schmuck sitting in this chair with my athleticism has long since passed. I'm proud of John Collins. I think coming into the season, knowing that he was going to be coming off the bench for developmental reasons, all the signs pointed to a veteran starting the late stage of his career, not super late. He's 26, 27 years old, but like starting that era of, okay, is he going to be playing until he's 37, or is this like the start of, this is John Collins' last more than minimum contract? All the signs pointed towards this is going to be his last more than minimum contract. And he'll play out the string, and he'll end up being a backup big for the rest of his career. And whether he's a starter or whether he's a backup, he has completely defied expectations as far as effort, as far as growth, as far as intentionality with understanding where he provides value, not reducing his enthusiasm at all, not reducing the amount he talks. A lot of that is innate. He's a talker, he's a vocal person, but you could really see someone like John Collins where the bottom falls out. I was completely expecting to say, all right, he's going to be injured or whatever for 40 games and not play a lot, not care, and he's just going to be salary ballast. And the cap dork in me is like, oh, wow, he's maybe a neutral salary right now, and he's more eligible to be traded. But now I'm seeing I also like reclamations here because like towards the end of his Atlanta career, he was a player where it's like, well, now we're gonna have to trade him for nothing, right? Atlanta dumped him to Utah for zero assets, so he was Utah saying, all right, we'll give it a shot. And having last year be so terrible, and personally, I almost feel bad for giving up, which is why now I feel proud. Is like this is a real player again. He is plus 10.2 on offense with his on-off stats. I think the defense is a little worse when he's on the floor, but being plus 10.8, that's like very good starter numbers. And there's a lot of things about him dribbling. He has higher usage. He's shooting incredibly, but it's just congealing into a player that I don't wince when he's out there. He's not taking weird shots. His threes are confident, and I'll bring it back to this is a player I want on the team. And in no way did I expect to be here in December happy that every time John Collins is out there, I'm just like happy with every minute he plays, knowing that we're probably going to be a possession or two better than the other team with respect to offensive output. And the Walker Kessler, John Collins, weaving in and out, well, I think that's something that, okay, now this is worth exploring, even if that pairing still isn't consistently strong. It's still something worth exploring because John Collins himself has proven himself. I've been so happy, and I don't think we were wrong in our pessimism, but now I have a reason to be excited, and that makes me happy as a fan.
When John plays like this, I think there are kind of two camps or two schools of thought. I think there are the people that immediately go, oh, okay, maybe now the Jazz can get a couple of seconds for him when they inevitably trade him in February. Or there are the people who go, oh, hey, maybe we've thought about John the wrong way, and maybe he could be part of the next interesting version of the Jazz in 2 to 3 to 4 years. Where do you find yourself? Are you reimagining John as a piece of the core? Not the core, because I mean, like he's probably not going to be an all-star level player, but have you started to rethink his place in a potential future version of the Jazz, or are you mostly excited about where he's at from an asset value standpoint? And I'm asking because I'm setting myself up too for this, but just curious kind of where your excitement falls.
So I'm going to reject the premise of the question because I think it's somewhere in the middle. I'm a lawyer. I'm going to say it depends, right? So it's mainly because I see him in his contract. He has one more year after this, and I feel like the value of his contract and who he is as a player will be more useful to a player or a team, I should say, perhaps next offseason. And that's where I see like, okay, I'm thinking of him as an asset, but not as like, oh, this is a player that is not negative value anymore. Now we'll take the Atlanta Hawks route and trade him for negligible assets. No, he's a player that I'm like, let's see if we can goose his value up even higher by waiting until his contract is a little bit more palatable. Who knows? He might play so much that he declines his player option or something. Like that's like in range for him. This next year it's $27 million or such on a player option. So I don't want to ship him off in February. I've also, and this is something you and I agree on, and perhaps that doesn't make for the most spirited discussion on this, but you and I very firmly agree that you cannot develop and grow a team with only young players. You need to have competent veterans kind of greasing the wheels and playing minutes. You can't have these young players playing 48 minutes. And if you do play those young players 48 minutes and you have no veterans, now you have non-NBA players filling out the rest of it, and you have, if you're trying to develop Isaiah Collier, Keontae George, and they're passing out to someone, and that player drops the ball or airballs a three, right? It becomes less of like a developmental piece. Whereas John Collins is out there now, it's like, okay, if you can't get this amazing finisher the basketball in a competent way, now I have an issue with the ball handler, not with John Collins. And it allows for a more fair assessment of our young players to have John Collins on the team. So I struggle to think about John Collins' next contract. I think that is a dicey proposition if our young players hit and you want to give them extensions, and it becomes very expensive to keep a guy like John Collins around. But John Collins is now playing at a level where if we play out the string on John Collins' contract and he walks away for nothing, I think that's okay. I like having him around for the value he's providing the rest of the team. He's not providing wins. The Jazz are not winning basketball games, so I don't really mind that. But trading him for 2 second-round picks or something, I don't think that's worth it, if that makes sense. But maybe next year you get a protected first or something. If he keeps it up, which is probably outside the realm of possibility. I just don't want to do that right now.
So that's fair. I think that there are a couple of reasons why, if you don't think that John at 30, 31, 32 is going to be really contributing meaningfully to hopefully by that point good version of the Jazz, I think that there are some reasons to take a not that valuable asset. Like here's what I wouldn't do, because it just doesn't make sense for a rebuilding team to do this. I would not attach an asset to get off of almost anyone. I just don't think it makes Jazz are not in a position where they need to or should attach an asset to anyone.
The Jazz salary cap is totally fine. They can withstand bad.
Great.
They can withstand bad salary for a couple years, and that they're totally fine. They don't need to get off stuff.
And actually, if they were to move a John, or let's say they were to move a Clarkson and Sexton together, then suddenly you're in a position where next summer they could have all of those draft picks and also have 30 million, 35 million in cap space. So I think that's the reason to think about it. And it's not because you'd be so thrilled to get some seconds. Although I do think the Jazz would like to have some seconds, because they're really low on seconds right now. And what having seconds would allow you to do is what the Lakers did when they protected the 2027 pick they owe the Jazz, which is to say, hey, we're going to put a little bit of, so like the Jazz could trade one of those unprotected Minnesota and Cleveland picks, but they could tell the team they're trading it to, hey, if it's top 5, you don't get it. If it's top 5, you get a second again. And right now that's a hard negotiation because the Jazz don't have seconds in a lot of those years. So seconds aren't a throwaway. They're interesting to the Jazz for that one reason. But mostly what I'm saying,
to know, every time we talk about the Jazz dearth of second-round picks, I am always going to mention that one of the biggest reasons for that is attaching 2 seconds to get off of Nickeil Alexander-Walker, which really just feels like Minnesota at the last second to extort both the Lakers and the Jazz. Or like, look, you guys can't get this Conley D'Angelo Russell deal done unless you give us 3 seconds or whatever, and they watered it down to 2 seconds. And to that point, Alexander Walker was not worth anything, so the Jazz said, fine, we'll give you the 2 bad seconds. And he's now, his reputation, although I quibble with his actual performance, but his reputation, Alexander Walker, is, especially after the Olympics, is much higher than needing to attach 2 seconds to get off of him. So good for Nickeil Alexander Walker to prove everybody wrong.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the only reason.
Sorry, I have to mention it.
It's fair. That's the only reason why I think that trading John could still give the Jazz, like there's a universe in which the Jazz, we all know they're gonna draft, unless something really unlucky happens, they're gonna draft with a high draft pick next June, and they're gonna add someone who ostensibly is going to have a chance at making them good, making them better. I do still think the Jazz feel like they need something more than just Lauri Markkanen and Igor Demon, or Lauri Markkanen and Dylan Harper. And the easy answer is that you just then spend another season being bad and you go into the AJ DeBonsa draft and you try to complete your core that way. Or if you have still a dozen draft picks to transact with and you have $35 million in space, there's also ways that you could go out and you could find that third star or that third quasi-star, in a different way. So I think that's the only reason why the John Collins thing is interesting to me. But you're right that the Jazz need competent basketball players for their development environment to be meaningful for everyone else. And the other reason why I do think John is important, and I don't, it's going to be hard to talk about this without full on going straight into the Lowry conversation, which I'm not intending, but if it goes there, then I guess what the hell, it goes there. Like, I think there are a couple of things that became clear with Lauri Markkanen's bumpy start to the season. Number one is I don't think he likes doing the 3 spurts per half, because he appears to have told Will Hardy, okay, I mean, I don't know if he told Will Hardy, but I know that Will Hardy has abandoned that gambit. And now Lauri Markkanen pretty much plays 10 or 11 minutes, sits once, comes back for the last 6 minutes of the half or whatever it is. So that's one thing that it looks like the Jazz are doing differently with Lauri, either because he asked or just because he wasn't in rhythm playing those 3 short stretches the same way that Rudy Gobert and Mike Conley used to do in the Quinn Snyder era.
It could be related to back issues as well. Like sometimes you get into a rhythm and you're warmed up, and the constant up-down can be pretty stressful on a lower back, and that's what Lauri has been dealing with all year.
Yeah, a lower back that's already kind of whatever, shaky. And the other thing is, I really do think that Lauri is. I think that Lauri is comfortable playing in lineups where you can imagine him as the 3 or the 4. I'm not saying that Lauri is a 3. I'm just saying that I think he likes being in a position where, like, one trip down the floor, it makes sense to have him guard Kevin Durant, and the next trip down the floor, it makes sense to have him guard Josh Okogie, and you have other personnel around him who can make that make sense. And to do that, you need competent bigs. If the Jazz moved off of John Collins just to move off of John Collins, then you're either looking at Lauri becoming a full-time 4 again, or you're looking at 32 minutes of Drew Eubanks. And I don't think either one of those is necessarily something that helps the Jazz a lot. So I'm with you. I don't want to move John just to move him, but I do think that it's tempting to go into next summer with a different looking cap sheet. And if something like that opens up, even if it's kind of asset neutral or it is just a second or two, I think as a Jazz team, you'd kind of have to think about that if you had a plan that you could actually get something done next year with $35 million in cap room or whatever the number would be.
Yeah, I think you're totally right about the asset play. I've become almost fanatic about competency on the floor. And just having Lauri out there with 4 nondescript players is just terrible. It's not going to help anybody. Having Keontae George throw passes to nobodies is not going to help. So if you're offloading John Collins, he's playing at a level that will help playoff teams. Like now you have people's attention, right? And with that $26 million that he's making this year, if you trade him to a playoff caliber team, all these playoff caliber teams have players that would need to come back. And if they are players of lesser quality than John Collins, but you can still play 20 minutes and not hate yourself, I think that's worth it. Okay, now we're playing with something that we can, keep losing basketball games if that's the goal, but still say, hey, we have a competent offense to be able to assess Lauri Markkanen appropriately, assess Keontae George appropriately, and all these other young guys. Just quick last thing on John Collins, so we can be excited about kind of what this means, and then I think this can lead into everybody else we talk about as positives and negatives. The one of the most frequently played lineups for the Jazz this year, I think it's their what they would consider to be their optimal lineup if everyone is playing correctly. Taylor Hendricks is unfortunately injured, but now we're dealing with Keontae George, Colin Sexton in the backcourt. In your front court, as you were mentioning, Lauri and John is kind of interchangeable forwards with Walker Kessler. This is a plus 5.4 differential, so this is a positive point differential, which can be common for some of these bad teams, but for some of the truly awful teams, they don't have any positive net rating lineups that play with any sort of frequency. So this is a positive net rating lineup, and it contains all the things that we complain about, right? This lineup turns it over all the time. This team gets no turnovers of themselves. Like, this lineup does not force any turnovers. They rebound like hell. They don't foul, and they shoot well. And so it's this weird thing of, like, they do things in extremes very, very well. And it's what you'd expect. There's no ball hawks on that roster. The efficiency issues of Keontae George is corrected by everyone else in that lineup, even with Lauri Markkanen struggles. And that team rebounds like hell. And that's really, really cool to see that this is a positive lineup going forward. So you can kind of assess, like, okay, if Keontae George's individual things and Lauri Markkanen's individual things and Walker Kessler's individual things, well, you put them all together, you have a team that can play. And that's, I think, pretty encouraging.
And so Walker, John, and Lauri are minus 1.3 per 100 as a trio, which, again, I think is meaningful that they can basically be playing even basketball with that trio. All right, I kind of launched in on the John, so I'm going to let you go next. What else are you pleasantly surprised, or what about the Jazz this year has exceeded your expectations, player-wise, trend-wise? You're next.
It's kind of a marker on the rest of the Jazz team, but I will continue to say that Kyle Filipowski is the best passer for his position on the entire team. And there is, even if you actually dive into the stats and it looks kind of gnarly on a lot of his minutes, I think there's a lot of reasons for that. There's been a lot of horrible stretches when Kyle Filipowski's been out there. I think the best, at least most aesthetically pleasing versions of the Jazz offense have been when he's out there. The ball is whipping around. The threes are more open. Lauri Markkanen is not swarmed by 7 people in the paint, throwing up prayers that don't go in. Walker Kessler is kind of moving with a little bit more grace and physicality if he's sharing the court with Filipowski in those rare minutes. But it's often that you see like Filipowski playing with Collins or something, and now things are really whipping around and really being athletic and fast. And that has been encouraging because now this is, we go back to conversations about the Matt Thomas trade a few years ago, where it's almost worth it just to have somebody on your team. If you're a late first round, early second round pick, sometimes you're just trying to find a player who has an A-level skill, right? Matt Thomas washed out, doesn't play in the NBA anymore, but his A-level skill was shooting. Maybe we can make something like that work. That is a deep random cut to say Kyle Filipowski has an A-level skill, right? That is worth developing. And he does a lot of other things well, and there's some struggles that he has. But I've been total whiplash from Summer League is his physicality and his defensive presence. He is still slow as hell defensively. His lateral movement is so questionable, but his defensive anticipation, he like understands what the offense is trying to do, and he is always like a step ahead in understanding where he needs to be defensively, and just being 7 feet tall in the right spot and not fouling. That's successful defense from if you're not going to be a shot blocker. So it's this picture of a player that I don't know if there's starter potential in there, but this is a player that I'm like, yeah, that's somebody who is going to be on a roster until he's 35 with that passing ability and his understanding on how to play. I'm sorry, the Kelly Olynyk comparisons will not stop for me.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad comparison. If anything, I think Kyle has some tools to work with, in terms of his own offensive ability, that might give him more potential to explore at the high end. Although Kelly also had a year where he was averaging 20 points per game for a shitty team, so I'm probably doing Kelly Olynyk dirty when I say that. By the way, speaking of doing people dirty, I did not mean for Drew Eubanks to catch strays earlier on my John Collins diatribe. I like Drew Eubanks. I just don't think he's a 32-minute per game player. So anyway, yeah, I'm with you on Kyle Filipowski. I know we're already like over a half hour in, and we wanted to save some time to talk about something fun at the end. So maybe we go the other way and talk about some disappointments, and then to your point, I think there are some people who are playing better on the macro, but there's also some nuanced things worth talking about, like Walker. We're going to get into Walker for a few minutes. I think when you talk about kind of what has left a little to be desired, that conversation obviously has to start with the Jazz's best player, whose stats are down almost across the board. His efficiency's down. He's averaging 18.6 after averaging close to 25 combined in his first 2 Jazz seasons. I'm not worried about Markkanen. I think a lot of the dip has to do with fewer minutes, fewer shots. They're also clearly asking Lauri to do some more things, to try some different situations. So I'm I'm almost to the point of just not even caring what his points per game average is and what his true shooting is for the season. He's still over 60% true shooting. So, it's not like a red alert or anything. But I do think that there's some stuff there that it would have been cool if it had gone the other way. So just open-ended question. Where are you at right now with Lauri Markkanen after these first 24 games?
I had a friend mention to me about the Jazz recently. Big fan, watches the games. He knew what was coming into the season. It's going to be a down year, and he said, "I'm just waiting for." I was hoping that Lauri Markkanen would just take over games more and be the Jazz best player, and I want to emphasize the take over a game aspect of it. And I immediately responded, like, that's what they are trying to do and give him the opportunity to do. He has never been that player. He has been a player who scored the most points for the Jazz, but he's always been a dependent threat. He requires an offense around him to give him those advantages where once you give him a little advantage, oh, you're in trouble. Like, he's bombing threes or he's dunking it over your head. But he has never, ever, ever been a player where you give him the ball and say, Lauri, please take over the basketball game. Please be LeBron James. Please be Kevin Durant, or even a much lesser archetype of those players. A type of player where you can give him the ball, and even if he's inefficient on most nights, there's going to be a night where, the ball's going in, and Lauri Markkanen is taking over the game. That's not who he is, but that is what they are trying to do with him this year. The reason the stats are down is because of that context, is he is learning how to take over a game, and the reason I am still disappointed even with that context is he's done a very poor job of even learning how to do that. And I don't even know if it's like, you can't fault a guy for you can't say the sky is green, right? He can be who he is, and we have a whole rest of the season for Lauri to get more experience and grow and see if he can figure this out. I was referencing in another context that I was hoping that Lauri's Team Finland experience would be more helpful in this context of, okay, maybe your defender is not some random Eastern European schmuck or whatever that he can immediately take over. The NBA talent is going to be much higher than a lot of the opponents that he was facing in the Team Finland context. But he at least understood, like, okay, if I am the best player and I need to take over a game, which he did in the Finland context in some respects, then this is what I need to do. Instead, we're seeing a lot of the gears turning and him acting slowly and him reacting instead of forcing the defense to react to him. Those are things that you either have it innately or you need several 100,000 minutes to, maybe not thousand, but several hundred minutes in that context of understanding where my passes are going to be. We talked preseason about if his turnovers are way up, that's a great thing because he's passing it and figuring out, that pass is not going to be here in this context. Instead, it's almost like the pass isn't even available to him because he's waited until the triple team is here, and it's actually hard to pass out of a triple team, right? Like the arms are in your face and you might not even be able to see. Well, the help came from here, so my open player is here. So I am fully on board with excusing Lauri's statistical production this year. I am still disappointed because I thought he had a little more juice to learn on the fly, and we would be 20 games in and say, hey, Lauri's figuring something out. Instead, it's like one play a game where I say, that's a great reaction from Lauri. Lauri's really taken it to the defense. Or he found an open man after a double or triple team came. It doesn't happen with regularity. And whenever he gets a ball in an isolation situation, I'm wincing. I'm waiting for something bad to happen. And I really need that to improve for me to feel great about Lauri's super, super, super high ceiling. Instead, we're at like, nope, he's the very best dependent threat in basketball.
Yeah, so I agree with all of that, actually. And I also think that, for me, I kind of have it broken down by stretches of games. Lauri was particularly bad at putting the ball on the deck in his first few games. He played 4 games with pretty poor statistical production. Then he missed a few. Then he came back and played 4 more. Those first 8 games, if Lowry put it on the deck, there was like a 50% chance someone was swiping the ball before he could turn the corner. Like, he was giving it away a lot. He was not recognizing where doubles were coming from. Teams send a lot of late helps to Lowry, meaning they're not going to load up on the ball right away as soon as he touches it. They're going to wait until he gets below free throw line extended, and then someone is going to pinch in and make him a little bit more uncomfortable.
Can I make a quick comment on that?
Please.
The thing that would be the best solution for that, as he's learning how to do this new role this season, is moving faster. So a lot of the time, the reason that this defense is sending late help is because the other 4 players who aren't guarding him have time to get set, understand where their man is, and they can have a half an eye on Lowry. Whereas if Lowry gets the ball in those isolation possessions and immediately starts moving, the other 4 players on the court might not be in position to provide that late help. A lot of times Lowry is waiting. He gets the ball in the isolations in these possessions and takes his time, and it gets the rest of the defense a little bit too set so that they feel comfortable sending that late help. I want him to move faster.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. Or they might be in a position to help, but they might be, if they're occupied guarding another action that's happened elsewhere on the floor, even if that action is fluff and it's not meant to yield anything. But I think you're right. Too often, guys sort of finish guarding the initial action and then have their 2 feet firmly planted on the floor, and go, okay, where's Lowry Markkanen? I got to be ready to help when Lowry Markkanen starts moving. That was especially a problem in his first 7 or 8 games. Then I feel like he started to do certain things better, but I still think for him, it's not. I still think for him, it's not usually going to be, I'm going to go beat the double. Like, the stuff I started seeing that I like, and I think this is how he should focus for now, is that he would see where the help was coming from and he would spin the other direction and go to a fader.
Yes.
Like, that could be a Lowry Markkanen go-to move. If he's got the ball, kind of 15 feet out, but on the baseline kind of mid-post area, and help comes from the middle and he spins away into a baseline 15-footer, he's going to make that shot a lot. That is a great sort of go-to move for him to have. He started to do that more. As opposed to like sheer force of will, I'm going to try to beat 2 defenders. I'm going to try to beat 3 defenders. I'm going to try to squeeze the ball and my 7-foot large body through this tight space. And as a result of that, I know that this feels like I'm pressing here, but like after those first 8 games that were so shaky, Lowry's stats from that point on, so we're talking about 11 games now, the last 11 games he's played in, he's averaging 20, 6, and 2 with shooting splits of 48, 37, and 88. Now, like, there's a problem with me citing. There are a couple problems with me citing that. Number one, every player in the league is better when you take out the games that they sucked in. So, like, what I'm doing here is a little bit convenient. Number two, even 26 and 2 is not like the all-star Lowry level that the Jazz got for a couple of seasons. So this is not me saying like nobody pay attention to the man behind the curtain. Everything's fine with Lowry Markkanen. I do think that there's some improvement that needs to happen. And again, even though I applaud the Jazz for taking the long view and saying, hey, we don't care about wins this season, so when else is a better time to just see what Lowry can and can't do with the basketball in his hands? But like you, I would feel better if the results of those experiments had more often been not disastrous.
Lowry hasn't surprised us this year. That simple. He's been put in a tough position, and he has wilted on a lot of those early games. And I think the offensive competency about the whole team, especially his ball handlers, has improved quite a bit over the past couple months. So there's like an entire season where I can regain some optimism here. And right now I'm just simply stuck at he is the league's best dependent threat. The 7-foot Klay Thompson that is worth all of that cash. But you need to find the 1A. And we'll see what happens.
Well, and you saying he hasn't surprised us this year actually reminds me of the broader point here, which is that in a lot of ways he's giving us the season that we and actually you, Mark Pereira, like you said going into last year, you said this a bunch, and I remembered it because it felt so right to me. You said, "Hey, Lowry's not playing with a real point guard this year, and it's going to hurt him. And what we're going to see is we're going to see him try a bunch of different shit, and some of it's going to work and some of it's not, and his scoring's going to go a little bit down and his efficiency's going to go a little bit down, and that's okay." And then it turns out that didn't really happen. Last year, Lowry kind of maintained his statistical performance last year from his first Jazz season, his All-Star season. So we're kind of getting that dip that we all expected to see last year with no Mike Conley. We're just seeing it a year late. And I think some of that is because, you know, like I said in my last Salt City 7, Kelly Olynyk is not a point guard, but he's a willing ball mover. He's a guy whose purpose in life is to set the table for others. So in a lot of ways, Lowry kind of did still have a spiritual Mike Conley equivalent last year. And
Simone Fontecchio surprised us last year with how many minutes he played, and he's not a distributor like Olynyk is, but he was a mover that also stretched the floor in a way that Taylor Hendricks is not being respected, in a way that Cody Williams is not being respected. When Fontecchio was on the floor last year, teams were immediately reacting to his presence out there, which was really helping Lowry. So there's a lot more season left to go, and it's more of the play. It's not really his efficiency or the numbers that we see on the page. I care about the play types. Like, what happens when Lowry's put in this position? And so we'll see there. Another disappointment, we'll go a little quicker here because I think a lot of these players we've talked about quite a bit. Keontae George was desultory to start the year. And like Lowry, he has actually improved quite a bit. And so, like, when you look at his shooting efficiency and such, they're not atrocious anymore. He's had, after starting really, really, really horribly, he's come into his own a little bit and had some great shooting performances. I'm still waffling on the point guard, shooting guard thing. After 15 games, I was questioning the future of Keontae George in the NBA, and now I see an NBA player again. But that still means we have a lot of season left to go, though, and he will still continue to be put in challenging situations, especially when Lauri Markkanen surely is only going to play probably a third to half to 2/3 of the games, right? He's not going to have all the talent out there. How does Keontae George kind of react, and how does he grow from here? Because it's finishing out the second season is really going to determine, okay, what is our expectation for him going into his third season, so that if we need to start thinking about even next offseason, 2 off seasons from now, what does our salary cap situation look like? It depends on how much you believe in Keontae George right now. And yeah, to your point earlier, if you throw out all the bad games, he looks great. But those bad games, there were some rough things in there, Dan.
Not even just from a percentage standpoint. Like, he's had games where he's kind of struggled to do some pretty basic point guard tasks, like manage the clock, get the Jazz into the possession with more than 11 seconds left on the shot clock. Like
dribbling a basketball.
Right. So, and look, I don't, even on my most bearish Keontae George days, I do think he's an NBA player. I think that the point guard, shooting guard thing matters for 2 main reasons. Number one, if what he is at the macro level in 5 to 6 years is that he's a 6'4" scoring guard, kind of shooting guard in a point guard's body, you can't throw a rock in the NBA without hitting 10 of those guys. That archetype is so abundant. There are so many 6'4", Jordan Clarksons, Anthony Simons's, in another era, like a Dion Waiters type, like Brandon Jennings, all these guys who are like, kind of at their size. You want them to be able to handle the ball, but that's not really what they are. They're not natural facilitators. So I do think that it matters in terms of his macro value, whether we think of him as, that, or whether we think of him as again, comps are unfair. I don't mean that he's ever going to be as good as this player, but like approaching the Devin Booker type of level where, like, yeah, you're a shooting guard, but we can also put the ball in your hands and be happy with the outcomes. The other reason why I think that matters is, again, so much of what we're trying to figure out with the Jazz right now revolves around, a fit with Lauri Markkanen and a fit with whoever the next couple of high draft picks are. And to me, it's meaningful. And again, I'm not alleging here that Lowry has gone to the Jazz and asked for the rotation to be structured this way, but it is meaningful to me that whenever the Jazz change their rotation, because they always do kind of, they start the starters, but then they have some of the starters play with some of the bench guys and others of the starters play with other bench guys in the rotation. And Lowry is always opposite Keontae George in whatever configuration they're doing. And that kind of just makes me raise my eyebrows. Like, does Will Hardy not like something about that combination? Has Lowry said, hey, I'd prefer to play with a point guard who does X, Y? I don't know. I'm not pretending to have any. To me, that is curious. And I think it's relevant as we think about what Keontae is. I do think he's a talented guy. I do think he's an NBA player either way. But, if his optimal contribution to an eventual Jazz contender is just being the 6'4" bench scorer a la Jordan Clarkson to the Quinn Snyder era Jazz, that's fine. But that's less core worthy to me than if he's someone who can develop into a real table setter. Right now, I don't think I would describe him as anything approaching a table setter.
Yeah, it's something to look forward to as the season goes on. I would love to see him go on heaters, right? Like we saw last year that those heaters happened and got us really excited. That's something that, okay, I can get excited about. We can see something happen later on. Passing is going to come and go. I would like him to dribble a basketball a little bit more confidently. That is probably, I want to see better scoring, and I want to see dribbling happen with competency, because sometimes basic offensive sets are ruined by the fact that he just gets knocked off of his dribble or has the ball taken away in a live dribble with 15 seconds still on the shot clock, and we haven't even done the first offensive action yet. It's some of those things that really make watching the Jazz real painful. The team is going to lose, but you want to see, okay, what happens if the offensive set gets run? Who's getting the ball? What are they struggling with? Instead of the ball immediately getting lost before it happens. The last disappointing player I think we should talk about is Cody Williams. Because I think we've seen a lot of... we knew he wasn't going to be a high usage player, but it's almost like he doesn't exist out there, and when he is existing, the shooting is bad. We can talk about his NBA spots in a minute, but I also want to say that in the 7 games he's played for the Salt Lake City Stars, it has also not looked very good. 29 minutes a game, 31% shooting on 14 field goal attempts. He's shooting 22% from 3. He has in the 7 games he's played, he has 1 game with 5 steals, 1 game with 3 steals, and the rest of them he has no steals. He has I think 2 or 3 blocks in that time. So it's, admittedly, I haven't watched 210 minutes of Cody Williams Salt Lake City Stars basketball, but looking at those numbers on the page, I know that he's not going to be in a high usage context at the Stars either. That's just not who he is. But to have the percentages kind of be what they are, and the defensive stats and the rebounding, it's only 4.4 rebounds. We've seen a lot of these players, these swingmen, go down to the G League, and you're using these lottery pick athleticism. They're picking off 8 rebounds a game all of a sudden. Assists 1.7. We know he's not a big passer, but part of his college profile was, well, he's going to be a ball mover and facilitator. He is going to have a role out there, and still it's just guy who stands in the corner, doesn't get the ball, and when he does get the ball's not going in the basket. It's the archetype we expected. He's not like a wallflower, and it's stunning how little he matters for a game. We kind of knew that is going to be what happened. It's the worst version of this archetype than I expected, and frankly, the Stars statistics don't make me that much more optimistic either.
Yeah, it's hard for me to make like long-term valuations of him until the man has like a couple sandwiches.
Yeah, this is all analyzing what I've been disappointed in so far, right? Is like, This is what I'm looking at. This isn't like, okay, put him in the coffin, put the nails in. It's more, I'm disappointed, Dan.
Yeah. It is disappointing. I said a lot of really optimistic things about how he could start to impact the team as a rookie, and to say he hasn't even completed those things would be a generous evaluation. Like, he has been kind of bad. I do think that it's hard for him because he has never played with men, and now he is playing with men. He is playing with grown ass men. Even in the G League, he's playing with adults who have bodies that are built for this. And I think that the Jazz need to put one end of a hose in Cody Williams' body and the other end of the hose in a vat of Crisco, and let that hose run for a while, and then we can start to see if there's something there. Which is my way of saying, like, I'm not giving up on him, but because he's so, I can't remember who I heard say this, so I'm gonna rip this off from someone and then not even credit them because I don't remember where I heard this. But like Bryce Sensabaugh came to the NBA with the body. Like, there are a lot of other things that are questionable about Bryce and whatever, but he came with a body. And Isaiah Collier came with a body. Cody Williams did not come to the NBA with a body, and he's trying to get through every night of basketball without people noticing that he's basically a teenager in terms of his body type. That's not to say that it doesn't matter that he's shooting 22% from three in the G League. It absolutely matters, but I do think that for the game to change for him, it's going to have to be a result, at least partially, of him being more physically comfortable on the floor with all of these men who are around him. So I don't fully know what to do with his season, but it is objectively, undeniably a disappointing start to his NBA career compared to what I thought he might be able to, with rookies. I think Will does a good job of setting the bar low. Will does believe in the no free minutes thing, but with rookies, he does a good job of setting that bar at, like, hey, as long as you, and they're different things, right? Kyle Filipowski, as long as you do X, Y, and Z, you will get some minutes. Isaiah Collier, as long as you do A, B, and C, you will get minutes. And they're different things. I thought that there were some
that's a great nuanced take though on no free minutes. I think a lot of people forget that kind of nuance of, like, it's not okay, the people who play the minutes will be ranked based on who is quality to not quality. It's, if you are doing the things we ask of you, we will let you make more mistakes in other areas of your game.
Yeah, they're not saying, okay, you have to be at least better than Svi Mikhailuk to play. They're saying, as long as you do these things, then I can justify playing you instead of Svi, right?
Yeah.
And I at least think that's how Hardy thinks about it. That's how it feels to me when I see what the types of things that different guys get pulled for. It's almost never results based. So I think that there's kind of a low ticket to entry for, like, if you show me that you're interested in playing the right way in these two or three senses of the phrase, you will play. And Cody hasn't really found a way to even do that. Mostly what Cody's job is in his NBA minutes so far is, can you please try to make sure that nobody notices that you weigh 90 pounds, because otherwise you're just going to get, like, beat the hell up, and it's going to be awkward to watch.
Yeah, he's got a terrific athletic profile where it's a lot of the complaints would be like, okay, he's got low usage. When you get the ball, shoot it. No, I don't care if you have limited usage in shooting. It's more of, are you going up for rebounds and getting beat up? Are you on the floor? Are you diving for things? Are you doing the things that are worth having you out there? And it's just there's been a lot of wallflower in every aspect of the game. There hasn't been an area where I'm glad he's out there. Quick note on Isaiah Collier, because I think it's worth comparison. Don't have to do a deep dive. Another player I've been pleased about because he's been the type of, okay, this is a point guard. There's a lot of range of outcomes for him. For example, and just to point the Salt Lake City Stars as an example, plays one game for the Salt Lake City Stars, shoots 15 of 18, 36 points, 5 assists, 2 rebounds. And he was
loudly says, I don't belong here.
Yes. 15 of 18. maybe some shooting luck, whatever, but he's shooting 18 shots in a game immediately. And he, how many turnovers? 2 turnovers. And I watched a highlight package of him, and it was just like best player on the floor, no question, right? Yes, he's a point guard. Yes, he is the type of player that if you have a ball in his hands, he's going to take advantage of it. But this is a player that I've been encouraged watching him. The mistakes he makes in the NBA are he throws dumb passes sometimes, and he commits the worst fouls on the team. He's the player that it makes me grab my head with some of the fouls he commits. But that's typical rookie shit that I'm okay with. Instead of, I didn't realize he was out there.
Yeah, well, and the last guy I wanted to bring up super quickly. I know we're coming up on time, and there's one other thing you wanted to talk about, which I fully co-sign on because I love the guy too. But just real quick, Walker Kessler, I think it would be hard to be disappointed with the way he has bounced back from a defensive standpoint and really looking as impactful again as he was in that rookie season from a defensive standpoint. I think both of us believe that there's some more meat on the bone offensively. Not just stepping outside to knock back consecutive threes like he did in the Phoenix game, but just that
which each of those 3-point attempts took about 9 seconds to release the shot. So
right, exactly.
I'm not holding my breath there.
Someone finished brewing a cup of coffee before he got that shot up. Yeah, so I think I'm satisfied with Walker writ large, but I do think also there are some other ways that he could continue to impact the game offensively, like he did as a rookie. So Walker is nuanced for me, but overall I'm thrilled to see him back playing with a lot of confidence and joy, and knowing that when he's on the court, that other people are scared shitless. And I think that's the really important thing about Walker that I love. So do you want to talk about your pet topic, which is also a guy I love talking about?
Yeah, I'm pretty neutral on Walker Kessler and neutral on Colin Sexton as well. I don't really have anything to write home about either of those players because I think they're doing kind of what we expected for the most part. But things can change for the rest of the year. Paul Millsap retired. He hasn't played in the NBA for a little minute, so I think we kind of forgot that he hadn't officially retired yet. And when I think about my Jazz fandom over the years, as a kid, I'm watching Stockton and Malone on. I didn't have cable, so it was like the rare chance they were on some sort of NBA on NBC lineup, which happened frequently for those teams, and then playing video games with Stockton and Malone, not really exactly representative of it. And then post Stockton and Malone, when I was kind of going into following sports and everything, I became a big football and NASCAR person. And the Jazz just weren't a team that was worth following for someone in Western New York. Like I didn't have exposure to the Jazz until I get to high school, and then all of a sudden things kind of become a little bit more. You can follow the team a little bit more in diverse ways. Like I still didn't have cable or anything, but the internet existed, and waiting for videos to load and such. And then you get to college, and then that was my Paul Millsap experience. Is college when I'm arguing with my friends about why the Jazz are going to win the NBA title. And a player like Paul Millsap, where and also was a fantasy basketball junkie, right? Whenever he was starting for either Carlos Boozer or whatever it was at the time, right? You're like, all right, 14 rebounds a game. This is immediate. And at first it was a novelty. And then he would have like stretches where like 23 straight double doubles or whatever. And the point totals are 15, 17, 19, 15, 17, 19. This is a player that like, it didn't always look pretty, but it never looked awkward either. It was just, this is a player who's doing his job, getting the ball in the basket in the paint. And you never noticed his height or anything like that. And yet still we'd finish a game and he'd have 3 blocks and 3 steals. And it was the player that just embodied how much I could argue with my friends about why the Jazz were amazing. We got this guy, Paul Millsap, coming off the bench. And that Miami Heat game that I watched live and completely lost my bananas over, it was pure Paul Millsap. And like we need something good to happen And there's Paul Millsap answering the bell. It was always coming to play for a Jerry Sloan type of team. And I was not disappointed when he started jacking up threes in Atlanta and making them. I was like, all right, this is he was not meant to do that for the Jazz. He was meant to do that for another team. And Paul Millsap ranks very highly on my list of players that has given me the most joy. When I think about other players in his era, there were a lot of good players that he played with for the Jazz that didn't give me as much joy as he did, even if they were better players. Paul Millsap always made me happy. And that's something I remember from his time with the Jazz. What a great career. I hope he comes back and, gets to sit with Bowler Jack on a broadcast or something like that and talks about his Jazz time, because he really epitomized what it was like to be a fan of those Jazz teams under Jerry Sloan. Just, it was bringing it back to like, oh, the Jerry Sloan Jazz are back. And I'm curious, as somebody who had a little bit more tangible memories of the Stockton Malone days, what you may remember about Paul Millsap in comparison to those days.
Well, Paul, I mean, you mentioned like fantasy darling. I wrote the other day that he, Andre Kirilenko, and Karl Malone are the only Jazz players in the top 10 on the franchise list for steals and blocks. That's really hard to do.
Yeah.
To do that, you have to be really gifted defensively and just be a worker, or you have to be like Karl Malone, where you just stay with the same franchise for 20 years, 19 years, 18 years, whatever it was. So, I mean, he's special in that way. He's special in a lot of ways. My best, I'm with you. I think he was a joyful player. I think he kind of, it was perfect and fitting that he started his career under Jerry Sloan, who's like the ultimate lunch pail guy, because Paul never gave a flashy interview. He never said anything controversial. He never gave an answer to any and Paul was around during the era when I was in the locker room a lot. Like I hung out in that locker room after every game, and I talked to guys, and Paul never gave an answer that was about him. In fact, one of my first experiences with Paul, he got drafted and had a couple of those, monster rebound games early on in his career. And I remember asking him, not even expecting that the answer was yes, but it was kind of just a way of like getting him to talk about himself and his knack for rebounding, except that it wasn't, because he didn't buy the premise at all. And that's that I said, hey, Dennis Rodman used to talk about how he would study the way that the ball came off the rim for different shooters. Like he would actually scout guys at the level of, oh, when MJ misses, he tends to miss more flat. And when so-and-so misses, they are longer rebounds. So I positioned myself differently. And I asked Paul if he did that. And it's one of the only times ever that a player has just openly laughed to my face about the stupidity of a question. He was like, what? No, I don't. Why would I do that? Like, I just go get the basketball. So
that's great. I never do that.
Yeah, he was not there for the Dennis Rodman conversation. Rodman really did say that, by the way.
I recall. Yeah, and maybe Paul Millsap could have put up Rodman numbers if he studied. Come on, Paul.
I also got to. I told a very G-rated version of this story I didn't tell the story. I just made a passing reference to this in Salt City 7. I once got to shoot craps with Paul Millsap during his restricted free agency summer. I may or may not have been a little impaired while participating in this craps game, which will be surprising because I know a lot of people don't associate me with that. This was in a period of my life when I was, trying some things out. And so I don't know if I was a complete ass or not. But by this time, Paul knew me. He didn't we didn't know each other. I'm sure he knew me by name. I'm sure he didn't know a ton about me other than oh, there's that kid who's in the locker room all the time. So I'm standing next to him at a craps table, probably not in my best state of mind, and trying to make a conversation with him and kind of trying to talk to him about what I hope happens. This is at a point in time when it wasn't clear if he was going to get an offer sheet or not, and what the Jazz were going to do. And this is the Kevin O'Connor Jazz days. So the Jazz played hardball with their restricted free agents. There wasn't any, it was always like, we're not going to negotiate against ourselves, go out and find an offer and we'll consider it. So, Paul's dealing with that. And I kept trying to get him to talk to me about Paul wasn't really in the mood to chat with me about his free agent status, understandably, because he probably thought of me as a media guy. His uncle/agent was there shooting craps with us, and he was a little bit more chatty, so that was fun. So yeah, the bottom line is I too have a ton of just awesome memories of Paul. I think a lot of people go straight to Miracle in Miami, which is great, but Paul was about so much more. And just, again, for me, it was just that lunch pail attitude. And I remember talking to him. Was it Bowler who came up with the Paperboy nickname? Because it's like kind of like the mailman in that he delivers, but you're not quite at mailman level. You can be a Paperboy. And I remember having a conversation with him in the locker room one night about how much he liked that nickname. Spoiler alert is that he didn't like it that much. So I'm with you. I love the crap out of Paul Millsap. I'm happy for him about the career that he had. And now I have a 5-year-old climbing around in my podcast space. So
I'll finish up by mentioning that as a second round rookie, he plays 18 minutes a game, right? He finished 6th in Rookie of the Year voting. And it's just, he was immediately a presence for a Jerry Sloan team. And I just love watching his career progress from best backup big in the NBA to being immediate starter, all-star kind of in the conversation, and just seeing the player progress like that, where he, wasn't a first-round pick. This is a guy who just understood basketball and played it really well and gave me joy. But this has been a great conversation, Dan. Hopefully folks have a better sense on what to look forward to over the next few years or the next few months. This is a team worth watching. I know I joked a little bit about maybe it's a team perhaps not worth watching sometimes. I like watching what players are succeeding and what they're not at. There's been some successes that I want to see improve, and I really want to see what Lauri Markkanen does the rest of the season.
I love watching teams in this phase for so many reasons. It's easier to watch from a place of intellectual curiosity and not be like hung up on results. But also there's just a street cred aspect of it. Like in 5 years, the Jazz are going to be good again, and we're going to be dealing with all these imposter fans that have no idea what it was like to watch Svi Mikhailuk pick and roll. Yeah, when you're 10. Sorry, we got it. We got full on invaded here, Mark. I'm sorry.
Hey, it's all right, but this is a family podcast.
I'll have to change my language a little now that I know it's a family podcast.
Well,
anyway,
I'll conclude us out since you did the intro. I'll do the outro so that to carry it away. Yeah, it's I don't mind fan how you fan. No one's gonna when the building is full and the Jazz are great. I want all the fans to love it. I love having the street cred, but I don't judge those who don't. And I'm excited to keep watching this team on random nights. This has been a Salt City Hoops podcast. That's Dan Clayton, our esteemed managing editor-in-chief. I forget what your title is, but you lead our operation. And thrilled that you could join us on a Saturday. I'm Mark Pereira, and we're gonna look forward to the rest of this Jazz season on this wonderful rebuilding year with some successes, some failures, and hopefully you'll be along for the ride. Have a great night.